Welcome to Name 3 Songs. I'm Sarah Fagan.
I'm Jenna Million, and this is a podcast where we discuss feminist issues in music and pop culture, all while empowering fangirls. Because let's be honest, fangirls knew about that band way before you did.
And if you stick around long enough, we'll also let you in on some new music the girls are already crazy about. Before we get into today's episode, we do have a new Patreon member to shout out. Holly has joined our Patreon all the way from Australia. And this is really fun and exciting because Holly's been listening to our podcast for a while, but we didn't get to know her until we did our celebratory 2-year anniversary live stream when Jenna and I were together the other week. And it's so exciting to get to meet listeners because there's so many of you from the beginning who've always been really chatty with us, but there's also so many new listeners, so many people who aren't really active on social media, but we genuinely mean it. We love chatting with y'all, and it's so much fun to get to know you guys.
Yeah, it's so also shout out Holly, because often our Instagram lives are only great time periods for the US and Europe, and Holly was up at 5 a.m. going to Tasmania on a vacation. So shout out Holly for tuning in when it was hella early. We love chatting with people, so if you guys are listening and you think we're scary to talk to, we're really not. We love talking to you guys.
Yeah, just go slide in the DMs and chat it up because it's really fun. Or you can also go and join us on Patreon because we do have our Discord, which we all chat on about pop culture and the episodes and just life in general. It's really fun over there. We really get to know each other and just share life advice as well as pop culture nonsense.
And speaking of pop culture nonsense, we just did a massive episode on Don't Worry, Darling. Number one, Sarah gives us a history all the way from the beginning, and then we get into a lot of what was going on at the Venice Film Festival. Obviously, the story's still unfolding, but if you guys are curious on our takes on it, or you don't know anything about it, and you need an oral history of it, we got you covered. And all of this is over on patreon.com/name3songs.
Yeah, so it's definitely at least worth joining for a month just to get the Don't Worry Darling content. Because there's going to be a lot going on because Harry's going to TIFF for My Policeman. There's a lot happening in the Harry Styles drama world of it all. So our Did You Hear episodes, which are supposed to be minisodes, but Don't Worry Darling, it took me 22 minutes to just unpack everything up to the Venice Film Festival. So that was a big one for us over on Patreon. So you get that, you get the Discord, like I said, and then we also have the level where we do our monthly music meltdowns, which is just us kind of talking about other things happening in pop culture that might be outside the feminist scope of things, stuff that we're thinking about a lot, all that fun kind of pop culture nonsense. And like Jenna said, you can go get all that at patreon.com/name3songs.
But with all that being said, Sarah, what are we getting into today?
Today's a very exciting day. I feel like I say that a lot. I feel like I start the conversation with today's very exciting, but it is because we're talking about Beyonce. I don't even need to sugarcoat it. We get to talk about Beyonce today, and we get to talk about her in a way that's very relevant. And I feel like we were always kind of anxious about talking about Beyonce because, like you all know, Jenna and I's background is very much in pop punk, rock, indie kind of music. We grew up listening to pop and then kind of went, but I'm a cool girl. Cool girls don't listen to pop. And missed out on a big chunk of pop music history while at least I knew about the pop culture going on around it. I wasn't listening to the music. And so Beyonce's always been a scary topic because we know her fans are really dedicated. We know that she's very important to the pop culture zeitgeist, to Black history, to just the Black feminism story of it all. And she's made very major moves in music. And so it's hard to even understand the lore, understand all of this. But I feel the one thing all of us can understand is that Beyonce has done a really incredible job of curating her public image, keeping her private life private, giving access only to what she wants people to have access to. And she's done it in a very kind way. It never feels like she's being patronizing by not giving access or anything like that. And so it's a really interesting discussion on how she's been able to have such longevity while remaining so private, while remaining so guarded, while being kind of a shy, famous person. And so it's a really interesting discussion. But of course, when it comes to having discussions about artists that Jenna and I are not very well versed in, we have to call in the experts. So Jenna, would you like to introduce everybody to our guest today?
It would be my honor, because today we have a lovely human of a guest on, and a lovely, lovely journalist, J'na Jefferson is a journalist and creative who's been featured in USA Today, BBC Culture, Harper's Bazaar, and more, providing commentary on music, culture, gender, sexuality, identity, politics, and social justice. She's also served as an on-air music and culture expert for television, radio, and podcast entities such as Access Hollywood, Yahoo's Build series, NPR Weekend Edition, BBC Radio 4's Front Row, and more, where she just discussed everything from reawakening of female rappers in contemporary music to artistic growth of Adele. J'na is truly a powerhouse of a journalist and such a perfect journalist for today. Her Twitter bio is also music and cultural journalist awaiting on her Beyonce retweet. We're hoping we can get you one step closer to that Beyonce retweet. So without further ado, hi J'na, welcome to Name 3 Songs.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm very excited to be here this morning.
Amazing. We are very, very, very happy and grateful that you're here with us today because you are going to be our resident Beyonce expert for the day. Because if you guys have been listening along with our podcast, you know that Sarah and I are big pop and rock people, and yet Beyonce is kind of a blind spot for us. So we definitely wanted to do her justice because she is Queen Bey. And so today we're talking about Beyonce's power because to me, in my eyes, she has this very unwavering, very icon, very almost godlike, untouchable presence within our pop culture zeitgeist. And she just turned 41. This is the month of Beyonce. This is September. So we are celebrating her with this episode. But as we did in a recent episode, a lot of pop stars in the past, haven't been allowed to make it to 30 or they've been treated a different way when they hit the age 30. But Beyonce's out here in her 40s, still just as famous, just as popular, just as relevant, just as impactful when she drops albums into her 40s now. And so kind of this episode, we want to look at how did she build this power? How has she been able to maintain this power? And what is she doing that other people really aren't doing? And what differentiates her in all of this? So as a nice kickoff question for everyone, J'na, what do you think really sets Beyonce apart from the rest? And what are some of these contributing factors that really make her this powerhouse?
I think what makes Beyonce stand out from the rest is that she possesses a level of excellence as an entertainer that's basically akin to the stars that our parents showed us growing up. She is I'm not saying any comparisons, but this level of excellence. It is Michael level. Yeah. It's Janet level. These are the stars that it's wow, you just look at them and you're this is amazing to be witnessing this right now.
Yeah.
And I think she's also gone from just being an entertainer, being a performer, to now really taking hold of her power as a full-blown artist. And she has a mastery of her craft. She's coming out and producing full bodies of work that are just beautifully put together, very intentionally driven. And her ability to consistently just keep outdoing herself in terms of these abilities as a musician, as an entertainer, as a performer. Those are basically all of the reasons why she's really the queen bee that we're seeing in front of us today.
In doing research for this episode and building up, discussing it with you and all that stuff, I kept thinking about that SNL sketch from when Lemonade came out where it was an office of white people being is Beyonce not ours? And I feel that it was a very impactful cultural moment and the pop culture zeitgeist of it all, of white people realizing oh, sometimes music is something you have to understand in a different headspace. And I just think it's really interesting because a conversation we've had before is that there's always been white pop stars throughout time. Mm-hmm. And then there's Janet Jackson and then Beyonce and sort of Rihanna and these artists who have been allowed to transcend genres when genre right now is not even really a thing anymore. But so many artists Brandy was so successful, had her own TV show, so many things that she was doing, and yet she wasn't even allowed to be called a pop star in the same way Britney Spears was.
Exactly. And
so it's really interesting how Beyonce did all of the quintessential white girly pop star things, and then once she stopped because she was old enough to have found her voice and found fame and be I can make music for myself and my people now. SNL did a commentary on it, and I feel they thought it was a really woke commentary, but I feel it was really tone deaf, especially looking back on it, where it's okay, everything doesn't need to be for you. And so it's interesting, that thing where when Beyonce is so powerful and is such a moment in the pop culture zeitgeist, such a name where it's you say Beyonce, you know who you're talking about, you don't need any other qualifiers. And then people are like, oh, what do you mean everything's not palatable for me specifically? And it's just like a really interesting thing where it's like she got so powerful that she was like, I don't need to cater to y'all anymore. And they were like,
no more catering to
like
you. Yeah, I mean, like, even when she did the Super Bowl and was trying to make a statement about Black Lives Matter, and everyone was just, who didn't understand what, and the fact that people still don't understand what Black Lives Matter, like, truly means. But when she was trying to make a commentary about it, and they're like, she hates the cops, she does this. And I'm like, that was completely not the point. I don't understand where you're getting that from. But it's like, if you are committed to not understanding the message as to why performers who are part of a demographic, part of a culture are trying to make points of, then you're just never going to understand. Like, you're committed to misunderstanding. And that's a you problem, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also, just kind of going off that, not to get on a whole other tangent, but I feel like in saying that, the opposite is so many white pop stars haven't had to make social commentary. So when you have someone who is making social commentary, it's the shut up and sing thing. It's like, well, that's not your place.
Yep. Absolutely that. I was thinking about that actually when I was thinking about like my responses to this conversation and these questions. When she basically was like to LeBron James, like, just shut up and dribble. Like, you're supposed to just do things that we as, white people just want to see Black people do. Like, we want to see you sing. We want to see you dance. We don't want to see you talk about being Black, because then it makes us uncomfortable. We just want to be comfortable with the parts about you that are spectacle. It's like, oh, look at that Black person run. Look at that Black person dance and sing. But when a Black person says something about, being uncomfortable with the way that we're treated in the eyes of society, it's like, oh, I don't want to hear about that. It's like, pick one.
Yeah.
And then really think about why you just want to watch us sing and just want to watch us dribble a basketball. Like, really just sit and think about that.
So looking at Beyonce's career in this way, because it was almost as if there's like this turning point where she's not afraid to put how she feels and what she means into her music. And I feel like these overlap. I feel like this point where she starts to shift with the messages that she's putting in her music and in her performances also overlaps with this point in her career where she kind of becomes untouchable. And Jana, maybe you can help us like pinpoint this, but it's so bizarre because like looking back on it, it feels like she must have always just been this way, but there must have been some point where like there was like this big shift in how she's now presenting herself.
Personally, I think everything changed for her when she fired her father as her manager right before the release of 4 in 2011. So from the time she was a young performer, from Girls' Time, then to just Destiny's Child, Matthew Knowles has been meticulous in crafting the hardworking, uber-focused artist that we see in front of us. And I think that having someone with that level of control over every single thing that you're doing, it's hard. Especially as someone who I feel like she wanted to be able to voice how she was feeling about certain situations and certain things. And the direction of her career as a whole, she was doing a lot of pop, like Crazy in Love. Everyone knows that song. Deja Vu, you've probably heard it. Single Ladies, you've heard it. Halo, you've heard it. And it's like having that level of notoriety, even as someone who, like, admittedly, Beyonce is very shy. So it's like, to be that front-facing pop individual coming out with all of these things and trying to be seen in every single way might have not been something she actually wanted to be doing. But her dad was like, but you're a pop star, so you have to do this and you have to be seen here and you have to do these interviews. And it's like, I don't want to do that. So it's like taking control of her own voice, her own power, and the direction of her career by firing this man and no longer being forced to produce the music that was pop-driven, intended to sell for radio, really only allowed Beyonce to lean into that artistry and really release the kind of material and the music that she wanted to make. And this also did come with starting to take a step back from the limelight as a whole. Like I said, she's really shy. And now that she doesn't have anyone managing her and telling her to do all of these things, she probably didn't want to do it in the first place, but it allows her to just focus on the work and focus on the music and doing what she feels is best for her career as a whole.
I mean, we talk a lot on this podcast about like the glass box that pop stars have been put into and are expected to stay in by heads of industry. And so it's really sad to like hear about the fact that her dad placed her in that box and was like, the only way you're going to be able to compete and be successful is if you do all of these specific things, even though you have like Janet Jackson and Michael Jackson before her who like escaped that box in their own ways and were still very successful, very important to pop music and like the history of music, etc. And so it is just interesting about how she was essentially like made to be this triple threat, maybe when she didn't want to be. Like, my first real memory of Beyonce is watching Austin Powers on an airplane when I was like 10.
Wow.
So it's that interesting and weird thing where it's like for maybe a month of my life, I was like, Beyonce, the actress.
Oh my goodness.
But it's like, but now in doing this research and like looking back, it's so interesting where it feels like her dad had a checklist of like what you're supposed to do to be relevant and acknowledged and be celebrated. And it's like, okay, you have to like be in movies, you have to walk red carpets, you have to sing like really crazy pop songs, you have to do all these things. Your music can't be like too specific to any one person's story. Like, it has to be very generalized and all of this. And so it is interesting, and I feel like it makes a lot of sense why Beyonce really became like the poster child for separating herself as like a public person from herself as a private person, because she was like, I've lived my whole life under a microscope. Every single thing I've ever done has been planned out for me, decided by somebody else. I'm going to now control the narrative 100% no matter what it takes.
Especially since like 4 came out in 2011. She was 30. She just turned 30.
Yeah.
So it's like there are things as you get older, like we're all in our mid to late 20s now. So it's like you look back at, you know, the way that you've changed throughout your 20s and recognizing like, yes, I do have a voice, and trying to figure out through the years like how you want to use that voice. And I think 30 being such a pivotal age and being like, I think what would really help is to let my dad know that I am in charge of myself.
Yeah.
I'm 30 now. Like, you back up, Dad. Like, I'm sorry. Like, you've been doing this since the beginning. The work ethic and the way that he taught her discipline and hard work, like, it's amazing. And it really clearly did work, because look at her now. But there comes a point when you get to a certain age where you're just like, I think my joy and my peace are far more important than doing things that people want me to do. Like, what do I want to do? And I think that was something that really did come with age. And that whole that time period was so pivotal for her. And that era was so pivotal for her. And I think was the catalyst for everything that was to come.
Yeah, definitely. It's so interesting to like think about from like that perspective, and like now knowing this, because like Jenna said, I've always known how important Beyonce is, but there was so much background, so much history that's like, how do you even learn all this? And then it's like learning it and realizing how obvious it was, kind of how much pressure she was under, and like all that kind of stuff is just so crazy, and everything makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah, she is so special. But I feel like now thinking about how she is so private, knowing what we know about the little parts of her personal life that she has shown us, it really does all start to make sense.
You were just talking about her, like, firing her dad being 30, and I didn't, like, put that together in my head. I was like, oh, she was, like, 24, you know? Like, to me, she's kind of just, like, ageless in general, because she's just had so much power for so long that I have no idea what age she is. But it is crazy thinking about that, because, and it's so clear in, like, a lot of, when she does do interviews and when she does say things, it is so clear about her work ethic, like, how hard she works all the time. Like, is probably someone who can't not work at this point. And there was a quote of her saying, like, if there's something upsetting me, I only take like one day to be upset, and then like I learn how to motivate that to me to like put it into my work. And I'm like, that is insane. I'm like, that type of work mentality is something that I feel like you have to learn when you're really young, and it's just like instilled in you.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So I was thinking deeply about like, why have I loved Beyonce my whole life? So I started really young. I got the Writings on the Wall CD when I was like 7. And that was the album that had Say My Name, Jumpin', everything. And I was like, obviously drawn to her, because I'm like, look at her. She just commands the attention. And now looking back, I'm like, oh, it's because like Matthew was in charge of making sure his daughter was front and center the entire time. So we had no choice but to be like, yeah, she's like the star. But also I relate to her very deeply, because like she grew up and she was doing pageants and competing, and she was basically pushed to be the best she could be. So I grew up as a competitive gymnast. So my relationship to perfectionism
Yeah.
is also very similar to the way that she likely goes through her life. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of understood that. I was thinking about it very deeply yesterday, and I'm like, I think I love Beyonce because we are so similar when it comes to our work ethic.
I just feel like for an artist who like is so private, the fact that there's still the ability to relate to her is really incredible, because I feel like there are certain artists where like they're so secretive, even though they try and like tell you things about them or whatever the case is. It's like you don't know enough to even be able to be like, oh, I relate, because then once you get like a tidbit of information about them, like you're like, oh, we have literally nothing in common. Why did I think we were similar? And it's because of like the idea you've built up of them in your head. Whereas Beyonce, it's like clear kind of like where she came from. So there is that relatability still compared to like other people, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it does. And I think being able to see the early glimpses of Beyonce, like in Destiny's Child, when she was like, oh my God, that Southern accent was like, she just reminded me of my cousins, because I have family in the South. So I'm just like, yeah, this is my family. And just being able to see like she was goofy and she's fun and this and that. So like now seeing where she allows us to see, it's really just like flashbacks to what we were able to actually, you know, be invited into experiencing of her. And I was also thinking about like, when did the privacy come into play? I still feel like I'm thinking about that deeply, but I think when it comes to having that level of visibility as a musician and just her being hyper aware of her abilities, her everything, just as a Black woman, it's like people start to assume a lot about you, and her just being very controlling of her own image, striving for that perfection. I think that's kind of what closed her off, like what forced her to close herself off to people.
Yeah. I mean, just coming from like an outside perspective and like somebody who's worked in entertainment media, I feel like she was slowly moving towards being more private and trying to figure out how to do that. But I think that the like Met Gala elevator thing was the nail in the coffin.
Oh,
that
yeah.
kind of made it so she was like, too many people are in my business that don't deserve to be in my business and are making like something way bigger of a deal, way more of a problem than like it should have been. Because obviously it's like infidelity is a problem, but it's like you can handle that however you see fit. That's your own business, and like the world made it their business, and it shouldn't have been in any way, shape, or form. So I feel like that was really, like, in my mind, is like there was like a line drawn in the sand from that point where she was like, okay, no, everything is going through me. I'm going to figure out however possible to control this narrative. And I think also that comes from like her upbringing of just having that work ethic to be like, how can I continue to be successful and be the Beyonce that we've created, whatever the case is, while also controlling the whole narrative and like not letting anybody in unless I want them to come in. That's just like my perspective from like an outsider's point of view.
Honestly, I feel like the elevator situation was like the cherry on top of the straw that broke the camel's back, because I feel like she was almost there. Like, oh man, I think there were 3 strikes. The first strike, I think, was when people started to say she sounded like she was uneducated.
Yeah.
I think it was 2012. Wendy Williams basically was like, oh, I love her music, but she sounds like she has a 5th grade education when she speaks. And it's like, as someone who's like, she's not controlling in a negative sense, but controlling of her image. So when people point out something about you that you're like, this is not a problem, this is who I am, I think that that's when it started to like be a problem. So like having been talked about the way she speaks, now that's something that we're like, oh yeah, remember like Beyonce is really Southern. And I think the last time she spoke in public, even after this whole mess, the last time she spoke to us in public was when she won the Grammy, was when she was pregnant with the twins. And she wrote out what she was going to say on paper, because she doesn't like going off the cuff, because it's like a lot of pressure and she's really shy. And also like the assumptions, it's like her just firing off the dome. I think she's now so self-conscious about people thinking that she's uneducated or not smart or her accent is too thick. Like she's just like, let me just control this again, write this down and be like, this is what you're going to get from me. Just very curated, very controlled. So there's no room for error.
Also very Virgo.
Oh, yes, very Virgo. So that was strike one. Strike two. I think this was honestly the straw that broke the camel's back, but then the Met Gala was like the other level.
Yeah.
When people started making comments about if she was ever pregnant.
Yeah.
That's so detrimental for any woman to hear, especially having been open through song about having a miscarriage and having complications about getting pregnant. So it's like, if I was in that position, I'd be like, well, you are never hearing from me again. Because if you're going to go this far to say that I would be so selfish because I'm guarded as it is, so people are going to have assumptions about me because I'm quiet. You guys would go so far as to say I'm so selfish that I didn't have my child and I faked being pregnant. Like, that's disgusting.
Yeah.
So I think that was honestly the straw that broke the camel's back. And then the elevator fight, we still don't know what happened with that. Yeah. I think her way of being able to talk about that was through Lemonade. It's like, if there was indeed a fight, like, let me get on this in the way I actually want to get on this and get ahead of this before you guys assume any further. Like, I'm over you guys just making assumptions about me. So let me just make some music.
You made great points, because it seems like after that point is when she starts, and I mean, I guess before too, but like, she uses song and also what she chooses to put on the internet as the way that she disseminates information to the general public. Like, not even just to fans, like to the general public.
Yeah.
And we had like a really great article in The Atlantic by Nolan Feeney in 2013 called How Beyonce Keeps the Internet Obsessed with Her. And just as a prime example here, they say Beyonce does not just write a handwritten letter to Michelle Obama expressing her admiration. She makes a whole video about it, so you know that she wrote it too. And then they go on to write, these powers come in handy when Beyonce needs to perform damage control. After rumors of a second pregnancy took off this past spring, she fired back with Tumblr pictures of her and husband Jay-Z kicking back with a bottle of wine. The post was notable for two reasons. First, it's the perfect example of just how much thought and effort Beyonce puts into broadcasting her desired message while still trying to seem casual and candid. And second, by publishing it to her own account, the message gained immediate authority. It's straight from the source, end of story. And so to your point, this is how she controls her narrative. Like, she tells the truth in like what she chooses to post on the internet by showing, not by telling, and then also what she chooses to put in her songs.
Absolutely. So much of it is calculated, even if it's posturing as authenticity.
Yeah. I vividly remember like Beyonce.com launching, and number one thing, it was hilarious that it was a Tumblr account. So I was like, this is iconic and amazing that that's like what she's using to host her website. But also just like how she would just like randomly drop like family photos or like these things where she's just like, oh, we went on vacation. And it's like this window into her life where she's like, the paparazzi can't do this. I'm going to do it. They're going to be curated by me. My team's going to take them. Like, we're going to be in control of all of this. And I feel like that's just such a power move. There have been artists who've like tried to copy things like this. Like recently, J-Lo just comes to mind with her fucking Year newsletter. But it's not curated in the same way that Beyonce's is. Like, Beyonce's always feels like there's a point and a reason behind it. And it never feels like braggy or like obnoxious or like, oh, write an article about me. It just feels like she's trying in her introverted way to like share with the world and kind of be like, you guys have given me all this fame. Here's something back. Here's
a picture of me. Yeah, it's just like, that's the best we're going to get, honestly, because she is, so fiercely private. I have an interesting relationship to Beyonce.com. Like, I love the pictures. I really do. Because it's like, this is as intimate as we can get with her, but it's still like, it's still so calculated, and it just doesn't feel as organic as I would want it to feel, or as it used to feel. Like, oh my God, when Beyonce first came on Instagram, her page, like, it was unhinged. She was at Baddie B, like, it wasn't even Beyonce, it was Baddie B, and she would just like post pictures of her, like, they were so blurry, you could tell that they were out on the town. I'm like, oh God, I miss the Baddie B days.
Yeah.
Like, for me, it's like, yeah, I see that you went out, girl. Like, I'm glad you had fun at Lucali Pizza that you love so much. But it's like, I want to see you scarfing that pizza. I don't want you to see you vamping at the pizza place. I just want it to feel a little bit more human. At times, it feels like it's not human.
Do you think that like this way that she does this was something that was maybe instilled in her by her dad, in him trying to keep her in that pop star glass box, or do you think that this is something that she's doing in spite of that?
I don't know if it's in spite, but I think that this is just the way that I think she wants to present herself, because it's like it still looks perfect.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of a coping mechanism.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's like, look, things are okay. Everything's good. My husband and I are so happy. Like, da 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 da. And it's like, it's still so posed and it's calculated. A lot of it is just so calculated because this is the way that she wants to present. It's like, no flaws. I'm flawless. I'm perfect. And it's like, yes. And as someone who identifies and understands the perfection complex, I get it. I totally get it. But it's like, for me, what changes when people are talking about like, oh yeah, we love Beyonce, or we love Rihanna. Everyone says it's because Rihanna feels real. I've said actually a couple times, and I feel terrible as like president of the Beyonce coalition that I like I'm saying these things, but I'm also a human. I'll get a drink with Jay-Z. I don't think I would get a drink with Beyonce because Jay-Z just feels real at times. He's capitalist and I don't want to talk to him, but like I would get a drink with him at a bar.
Well, okay, so my question is then, especially because like Jay-Z also, and them together, kind of pretty much a power couple, like pretty much a dynasty at this point, especially like the Carter's album and them doing like their music video in the Louvre, like very much power couple showing exactly what they've achieved. My question is like you saying like there's this difference in their personalities. It's like, does Beyonce, in the way that she chooses what to show and what not to show, does this add to her overall iconic feeling of her being untouchable? And like I guess like what ways does it add and subtract? Because it's like Jay-Z also similarly, essentially status wise, they're very much the same, but I guess like how does this feel different as like a fan and a journalist?
I think, that's a good question. I mean, if we're thinking about ape shit, right? Like that whole video, honestly, the whole album, Everything Is Love, is just like visual, audible braggadocio. It's like we're in the Louvre, where I don't know if you've ever been to France, but we're not welcome there sometimes. So it's like, you guys don't want us in France. You guys don't want us at the Louvre, especially. There's literally one picture of a Black person at the Louvre, which is what they put at the end of the ape shit video. So it's like, honestly, like a visual fuck you to look at the apeshit video and being like, look, they're dancing in front of Napoleon's, portrait. And it's significant because Napoleon reinstated slavery. And it's like, oh, we're in front of the Mona Lisa. Like, we're not supposed to be here. We're not supposed to be looking at these beautiful works of art. And then kind of flipping it and being like, we are the works of art. In our aesthetic, we're regal, we're dancing, someone's getting their hair parted and braided. The girls are just making themselves just visual art. It's like, it's really just like an FU, and looking at the Black bravado and being like, we are creating so much of this. So the fact that you're trying to keep us out is like, okay, watch. We're going to rent this place out and dance and sing and rap and do whatever it is that you think that we are just like, whatever we're doing is contributing to the downfall of society, but we're going to do it right here in the Louvre because we can. I love everything about ape shit. Every time I'm like just watching YouTube videos and ape shit comes up, I'm like, well, I guess I have to sit and watch the 6 minutes. It's so good. And the album itself dropped like right before Juneteenth, which is like, everything was, like I said, calculated, but this was, it felt good. So much of the lyricism and the themes on that album and just the imagery of the music videos, like, were meant to take the stereotypes of the community and flip them to fit the idea of like the Black bourgeois. Like, there's a line in Black Effect that's like, an N-word's late, but he's best dressed, slowed down by the weight of my necklace. And it's like, it's so funny.
But I mean, also like, in creating the album, in creating that music video, it's also the whole thing of like, so much art and so much music was stolen from Black people by white people and then claimed as like, oh, white people created this, and it's like, fuck off, no you didn't. And like, that's the whole thing of like art history and music history, especially music history. Like, so much was stolen from Black people and from their culture and from their background and like from new cultures that they created by being forced to be slaves in America and all that stuff. And it's like, yeah, more power to you going to like an establishment that's very anti-Black and like dancing and doing your things where it's like when white people do it, it's celebrated. When Black people do it, it's like, why? What are you doing? No, don't do that. It's like, but you literally took it from us, claimed it as yours, and then it's okay. And so I think it's so incredible in everything that Beyonce and then Beyonce and Jay-Z as a couple have done in regards to like culture and movement and like reclamation and all of that sort of stuff. It's so incredible because of the box that just the American media industry tries to keep anybody who's not white in, and where they're like, you have to, like we were talking about earlier, it's like, oh, just shut up and sing, shut up and dribble. It's like you have to stay in these roles that we've dedicated out to you, and it's like, no, that's bullshit, shut up.
And that's what I really do appreciate about Beyonce. It's like with the platform that she has, she's been able to draw attention to these things. Like obviously she's not the only musician who's drawing attention to like colonization, and now with Renaissance, like pointing out the fact that like dance music started in the underground Black, brown, queer and trans scenes, like in the clubs. So like I do appreciate her for that, but what I don't, oh man, I feel like a traitor, but I'm like, I'm just being real. It's hard to be a journalist and a stan. But a lot of points have to be made. Like, for example, girl, when you are so calculated and you're like, it's a business. Like, Beyonce is a business. She's a brand. She's putting out music that is going to cater to a group of people because that's her fan base. She's going to make music about Black women. She's going to make music about Black people. She's going to make music about the gays because she has, oh my God, all the gays in her pocket. But it's like, also, if you're going to make an album about the power of Africa, you shouldn't be bullied into talking about the SARS movement. And you shouldn't be reprimanded for having a whole album about Africa and then putting on the Tiffany yellow diamond as though that's not a blood diamond. Like, it's like, you are so calculated, but you are still missing such critical things as a means to be like, look at me, look at me. I'm like, girls, like, please, come on now. And I feel like you have to kind of open yourself up to that criticism. And I know it's something that she doesn't like, but it's like you also have to be a little bit more conscientious about if you're going to try to make something that's representative of an entire culture, an entire diasporic group. You have to also be conscientious about the things that you are taking on that don't involve the diaspora. Like, yeah, cool, you wanted to be in this Tiffany's campaign, show off your love with Jay-Z or whatever you guys are calling it these days. Don't wear the Tiffany yellow diamond. Like, it's just, that is such a symbol of colonialism that it's like, it's dating back centuries and you still, like, come on. And it's like, I think I read something, she's like, her publicist said, like, she had no idea. I'm like, yeah, that means you got to do some more research. Like, you're so hyper-focused on what people think of you. Be hyper-focused about the situations and the brands and the things that you're aligning yourself with.
This kind of brings up a couple of thoughts for me. One being, so she got some criticism when she did the VMAs performance with like the feminist brand behind her, which is honestly just like that image is seared into my brain. And she also like put a definition of feminism up as well as just like the word. And I think it was her kind of like putting a stake in the ground saying like, hey, no, I care about these things. Like, this is what I stand for. And like, honestly, just bringing attention to it in general, because 2014 and like a little bit earlier, the crossover between feminism and pop culture was so weird that like pop stars were like, no, I'm not a feminist because I don't hate men. Like, it's like, and then Beyonce's like, actually, that's not what that means. But it's interesting because it's like we were talking about before, like her having to conform to these like essentially white standards of like what a pop star is and what a pop star does and how you behave in the spotlight. And it's almost like by conforming, she was able to reach this level. And now that she's at this level, she's allowed to talk about the Black feminist story. She's allowed to tell Black female narratives that have not been told at that level. So it's like, in one regard, she's telling stories and giving representation where representation has not been given. But then there's things like what you're saying now of like, it's the double-edged sword because she's also doing things that aren't falling in line with this narrative that she's presenting.
Exactly. And it's like with the feminist performance, especially just like that whole self-titled was, obviously it dropped in the middle of the night. And it was just, what a moment that was. And just everything that I feel like self-titled might have been like the last true glimpse into Beyonce's life. Like, yes, Lemonade with the cheating scandal and her addressing it, but mostly just talking about Black women's healing and why it's important for us to like stick together and heal. But I feel like self-titled itself, like her talking about her miscarriage and singing about like why she likes sex, and it's okay to like sex as a woman and still love a man and still be a feminist. Like, I think that was so important of her, and especially opening up conversations about Black maternal health. Like, I think that year was also the year that Serena Williams talked about how she was not being heard by doctors when she was giving birth to Olympia. And once again, like opening up more conversations about Black maternal health. Like, it's so important to have these conversations, especially as a Black woman, because these are things that, like, I mean, if I'm afforded the opportunity to give birth, it's something that I have to potentially deal with. So I'm glad that people who are like Beyonce are using their platform to talk about the stuff that really does matter to me as a Black woman.
It's just so important to have people who have those voices and are able to like shed light on things, because it also helps educate people who wouldn't even think to like go be educated on that stuff. Because I mean, there's so many issues, especially since like feminism has become a big thing about like white women really focusing in themselves in like white feminist things and not intersectional feminism. And it's like when you have these huge pop stars and these huge people in culture acknowledging like, hey, this is how like your fellow women are struggling, maybe acknowledge this too, and then choosing to continue not to, is so unhinged and so ridiculous and so frustrating to like watch happen in the media and just like in the world, where it's like Beyonce is such the moment, such like a cultural thing, such like a part of the conversation, that it's like, how can you not listen to what she's saying, what songs are being put out, and then go and educate yourself? Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me, because it's so easy to like understand a message, because unlike some other people, it's like her messages in her music are very clear as to like what she's sharing, when she is sharing. When it's such like a heavy subject, I would think people would want to know more about it or whatever the case is, but people like to focus more on drama and nonsense than like serious conversations and serious topics. And I mean, I feel like in a way the general public response to like her sharing that much information in an album could have also pushed her towards making her albums more generalized in the discussion topics, and like her more private and all that, because she's like, I'm trying to share the Black female story because I've been given the opportunity to have a massive platform and massive access to the international public, and you guys are like, let's not think about that. Did she actually have a baby? And it's like, what the fuck? Why should I give you any access to me if you're gonna be like that?
That's a really good point. And I think that, that's a really good point. It's like, I showed you so much. I said what I had to say about myself, but clearly you guys wanted to focus on the salaciousness, like, who's Becky? And it's like, you know what? I'm going to just make an album for the gays and have that be like, I'm tired. Because like, clearly I'm telling you guys something very deep and important about my experience, the Black experience, this and that. But you're just focusing on like these little crystals of, you know, things that really don't matter in hindsight.
I hate to say this, but it's almost like she's come full circle to like put a ring on it, and like all the like love bangers that she has that are so generalized. It's almost like she's come full circle.
I think that Renaissance is the long-awaited follow-up to B-Day, because B-Day to me is quintessential Beyonce. So now we have like something fun again, and it's something that everyone just like wants to keep listening to, because it like not only makes you feel empowered to be yourself against all odds, but it just like this is the kind of music that it's like, don't get me wrong, I didn't love Lemonade when it first came out, because I'm just like, I just want Beyonce to be fun again. But this is a Renaissance. Not only is it excellently crafted, but it's fun. And I'm like, this is the Beyonce that we miss having.
I was listening to, I'm pretty sure it was Popcast, another podcast, and they had a bunch of journalists on to talk about Renaissance. And they were talking about the song America Has a Problem, and they're like, oh boy, this is it, like she's gonna call everyone out, like this is gonna change everything. And then it was kind of just like let's forget about our problems and have fun.
Yeah, that's basically that song.
But it is interesting, I mean, also just in the context of like where the world is today, it's like we almost need that escapism in our lives, because everything is so awful that nobody wants to really deal with reality. So,
and it's definitely not the first time in pop history, like contemporary pop artists, especially female contemporary pop artists, have used, bad times to come out with dance records. Like, right after the AIDS crisis, we got Madonna's Vogue. God, Rhythm Nation was crafted in response to all the bad shit that was going on. Janet was like, I see racism and I don't like it. So how about we come together and dance and change the landscape of pop music as we know it. So it's like, this is not something new, but it is, given the landscape of where we are right now at this, oh God, hellfire of a world. Yeah. We needed something like Renaissance to just make us feel like, at least for 1 hour, just like we're okay.
Yeah. I'm gonna roll it back a little bit to this elevator incidents, because we also do have an article in Vibe by Aaliyah S. King in 2014 when this all went down, entitled $1 billion in an Elevator, Beyonce's Calculated Authenticity. And of course, the line that Beyonce puts in this song Flawless is, of course, sometimes shit goes down when there's $1 billion in an elevator. And essentially, Aaliyah is writing to make this point that, is this song a moment because of the art or because of the news and because of the gossip? And Aaliyah writes, there's a bit of a risk with Beyonce's new protocol. The drama and the pageantry is beginning to overshadow the actual music. There are literally millions of Google hits when you do a search for the Flawless remix, but not many say anything about the actual song. Is it art or just news? And so kind of going back to this line that Beyonce walks, both with telling her story and owning her narrative, but also with the way that she creates music. Because is this also a learning point for her? I don't know. I'm just curious your opinions, I guess, because it's like, does it matter because people are talking about it no matter what? But also, did the cultural conversation around what she's saying in her music make her step back from, as Sarah was saying, being so personal?
That's a good question, too. I mean, yeah, in a way. Because the deluxe edition of Self-Titled with the Flawless remix came out after the whole elevator mess and before Lemonade. So Lemonade was like okay, here's what happened, but not really here's what happened.
Yeah.
But let's focus it on Black women as a whole, because I don't want all the attention about this particular instance on me again. But I think with this particular line, it's like, we know Beyonce's team is very good at marketing. They're really good at promo. But they're also she didn't have to drop a press release for the elevator thing. She's just like, let me just add a little sprinkle it in, and then you guys can do the rest of the work, because this is all I'm going to say about it. It's you're never gonna know. I'm gonna just let you know, when we're all damn near billionaires, something might happen, and then just leaving it up to facetiousness is oh, okay, that's what she'll say about it, and she's never spoken about it again.
I love this idea of utilizing your music and being able to do remixes and re-releases or whatever the case is as a way to get ahead of the narrative or say something without it feeling oh, Beyonce made her representative call People magazine and give a statement. Instead, it's oh no, Beyonce got Nicki Minaj on the line and did a remix of a song to give a statement. And so then it's it's coming straight from her mouth, but it's also is it coming straight from her? Is this what we think it is? Could it just be a coincidence? What's going on here? So there is kind of that secrecy, but also that not secrecy, but also just her being so in control of everything in a very my life is also my business kind of thing.
Yes.
And not in it's my personal business, but it's no, my life is Beyonce is a brand at all times, anytime it gets written about or whatever the case is. So it's okay, I need to go back into the Beyonce organization and make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed.
Yeah.
Yep. And it goes right back to just controlling every single aspect about what people think, what people see, everything. Man, this is a story about control. Talk about Janet and everything, but this is a story about control for real.
Well, okay, so thinking of Taylor Swift, because I feel like Taylor Swift is trying to do what Beyonce has done. Taylor has very much stepped away from the limelight unless she's promoting an album, and Taylor loves to talk about her drama in songs, mostly crushes and boyfriends and that type of drama in her songs. But there's so much lore around Taylor. And I was trying to figure out if it's just because Taylor so recently has done this trying to step away thing that fans still know so much about her, whereas Beyonce, it's been 10 years where she's been primarily out of the spotlight. But also I feel like Taylor gives just a little bit too much, whereas like Beyonce says like one sentence and is done and like leaves it vague and that's it, whereas like Taylor continues to drop breadcrumbs and like continues to give people just enough so that they still talk about it. And so I feel like in that way, Taylor's doing this, trying to do something, but not.
Yeah, I don't want to ruffle any feathers, but it's like, I have recognized that she's gotten a little quiet. So like, since I don't pay attention to her purposefully, I don't really notice when she gets quiet. But as someone who works in media, like I know she's dropping an album because it was everywhere. So it's like when Taylor Swift says something, I'm going to know about it because, but in this era, I mean, Beyonce, for her, it's like, even if she keeps quiet, the excitement of when she does step out of the shadows is so heavily publicized. And then she's like you said, like she'll come out and be like, the groundhog saw her shadow. And then like, that's it. But Taylor's just like, oh, you're talking about me now? I'm going to just keep talking. So I will be talked about because I'm talking. And it's like, Beyonce doesn't have to talk and people talk about her.
Yeah. I think that the interesting thing is it's like, it feels like Taylor was like, oh, let me take a page out of the Beyonce playbook, but then was also like, oh, it's too quiet on the Western Front. I gotta like give some clues and get people talking so that they know an album's coming out. So the interesting thing also in that, like, it feels very much, at least from like Jenna and my perspective as like people who like to read pop culture, pay attention to these music people, whatever. And I feel like a lot of people like have this viewpoint of like Taylor is kind of trying to copy Beyonce and just like the bigger than herself kind of like zeitgeist kind of thing and all of that. And like, if Beyonce can be private and be successful, I can be private and be successful, whatever. Like, I think that Taylor's like spoken about being a Beyonce fan, so it makes sense. But the big difference here, and the thing that really keeps me from really getting in like the Taylor Swift camp, is that Beyonce is always kind of like an activist first. Like, the things that she cares about are important, and she will speak about them if necessary. She's always doing the most she can to like show like, I am like a feminist, I'm a proud Black woman, I'm an activist for like Black people, all this. Taylor Swift tries to convince us that she cares about women, she cares about all these things. Meanwhile, it's like, oh, it's not an album cycle, therefore I cannot talk about the fact that Roe v. Wade just got overturned.
Oh my God.
Like all these, like the media hates me, I've been to everywhere, I can't speak out for Hillary Clinton, like I can't tell anybody I'm not a Republican, that I'm not the face of like the evangelicals of America. It's like, dude, you're literally the poster person for like the American like Nazis. Like, they used you as like the white, I don't know, the white ideal, and it's like, and you've never spoken out about it. So it's like, you can't try and act like you're following in the footsteps of Beyonce, who's an activist and goes above and beyond for the causes she cares about, and not do it yourself. It's unhinged. It's ridiculous, especially as a white woman. It's even more unhinged.
I was just gonna say that because I remember she didn't say any, like, I mean, obviously you don't have to say who you're voting for. It's like, it's your right to privacy as a human to just be like, I voted. Just, you can say you voted and that's fine. But for someone to have the platform that Taylor Swift has, knowing how important the 2016 election was and would be for the future of this country. I mean, look at where we are now.
Yeah.
It would have been imperative for her to have said something.
Yeah.
So then after everyone was just like, blah, 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 and like talking about her and how she doesn't speak out, then she, I think, was just doing so much damage control. Now she's doing too much and putting it into her music where it's like, it's clearly pandering. It's not authentic.
Yeah.
Because you're not talking about it otherwise. So I'm like, what?
Well, she's centering white feminism. That's the issue.
It is all she does. And it's just like, that's why
it's not even feminism, but like,
it's not even feminism. She's just like,
yeah. Anytime she tries to be a feminist, it's very white centric, and it's like very exhausting.
My God.
Well, I mean, this is kind of my point earlier of like, white pop girlies don't have to talk about politics if they don't want to, like, period. And she's kind of the prime example of it.
She's so cringe.
I guess I'll wrap up our Taylor bit by saying, in conclusion, Taylor is attempting to do what Beyonce has done, but is nowhere really near close to actually achieving.
Yeah, because you have to have an opinion about things.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing, is it's like, I feel like so often in the comparison of specifically white famous singers or like people in the public eye who have done similar things to Beyonce, in that like they kind of disappear and are like, oh, like my life is super private, whatever the case is, like they'll get compared to Beyonce because she wrote the playbook for how to do this successfully and like have success while not having to give like representative like comments to everything and like not having to constantly be in the public eye and all that sort of stuff. And I feel like anytime people are like, oh, like there's a separation between the business side and the personal side or whatever, a lot of the time it's always harkens back to like what Beyonce has been able to do. But the thing is it's like, have there been any other artists that you personally can think of that have done this as successfully? Because I feel like sometimes people will like compare Rihanna, but like Rihanna hasn't made music in like God knows how long.
She's never made music.
Who knows when she's going to next, because she's like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur now and I have a baby. Who needs music? So it's like, is there anybody else? Because like I feel like maybe Lady Gaga, kind of, but I don't know. Like, I don't know enough about her. So, like, have there been people who have, like, taken a page from Beyonce's playbook and actually done it successfully? Or is, like, Beyonce an anomaly in the case of being able to, like, be private and be public and still remain as important of a figure?
I think today that's an anomaly.
Yeah.
But looking back, this is not new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, there are a lot of artists, like, who have been famous since they were, like, even younger than Beyonce was when she first got famous. And they're still here, and you don't hear about them because they're just, like, I just do the music, and I put my stuff in my music, and that's it. Like, I honestly think, like, perfect example would be Stevie Wonder. Like, he'll talk about... He's been famous since he was 11. He puts his stuff in his music. Like, he had a whole song about hating Richard Nixon. One of my favorite songs by him, actually. One of my favorites. And it's just like, yeah, I do this. And then obviously the Happy Birthday song was created to raise awareness about the importance of making Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday a national holiday. And it worked. So it's like, he did it. Like, he's like, this is my music. I'm doing what I think is important and singing about what I think is important. And then I'm going to go away now. Like, how many... That man actually, like, said he was gonna like stop music and just like move to Africa. He's like, I just want to be by myself.
I feel like that's really true though. Like what you're saying, there's no contemporaries that are on her level. And I think that was kind of the point of wanting to do this episode is like, I mean, Britney Spears also 40, but entirely different story. And honestly, a lot of Britney's narrative, we just can't even compare because of the conservatorship. So it's not even like really a fair comparison, but I mean, I think that's why Beyonce feels so untouchable. Like, she feels like this legendary figure we're gonna have forever in our lives. Like, the cultural impact has already been done. Like, there's no way of undoing this. She is a great... And, like, that's what you're saying at the beginning, like, not to make comparisons, but it's almost like that stardom level of Michael Jackson, of Janet Jackson, of the legends of history. But she's a contemporary. Like, she's still part of the conversation. Like, she has not faded out of the conversation. Yeah. And also, for some reason, Adele popped into my head while we were doing all of this because Adele, like, her albums massively impactful, and she disappears, but nobody really cares about Adele's life. Like, nobody really cares about Adele other than when Adele releases an album,
because it's like then difference. It's like, yeah, it's like when Adele releases an album, you know, she's going to sing about whatever she's going through, but making it so universal through her ability to tell stories and write songs. Like, we just know she's doing it for her. Especially this past album, this whole album was like very central to the Adele experience rather than like a holistic, universal, we all hurt type of thing. Like, God, that one song where she's talking to her son about being divorced. Whew. But I'm like, wow, just being able to hear Adele even talk about the things that are actually central to her experience as Adele Atkins is like, okay, this is important. And then I think that's major for a star of her caliber because Adele is massive.
Yeah, she is massive when it comes to streaming, but I just don't think people care about her otherwise.
They don't
care about her the way people care about Beyonce.
They care about her during like the album cycles and
the
like
album cycle
or whatever.
Yeah, they're like, oh, look, she's just like us. She eats like bangers and mash and says the F word every day. It's like, because she's like an average chick.
But I think this is where Beyonce excels. Of course, the exceptionalism in her artistry and what she chooses to convey. But I think part of it is the activism. Like, part of it is speaking up for people who historically have not had voices, have not been able to tell their stories, especially Black women having their stories told. I feel like that's part of it.
Yeah, I think that what she's able to convey through her music is very important. And I think because she is so private otherwise, that is keeping us holding on. But I do definitely wish, like, while we don't really care too much about Adele's private life, but when she is around, it's fun.
I think also, like, in the social media era and all that, it's like we want our stars to be more like us. Like, we want them to be more real. Because, like, if you look back into, like, Hollywood of yore and whatnot, it's like, from the start of Hollywood, it's like, these people, you didn't know anything about these people. You found out about, like, feuds behind the scenes, like, years later, because somebody wrote, like, an autobiography because they needed some money or whatever the case is, you know, because, like, the studios had so much control over the narratives because it's, like, stars worked only with their record label, or actresses and actors worked only with, like, the studio that they were signed to and all that sort of stuff. And then tabloids come around, and then tabloids control the narrative, and so people need to have representatives speaking out for them, or they need to, like, give comment or whatever the case is. And then when social media comes around, it's like, oh, look at me, I'm just like you. And it's like, you're not just like me. Your house costs more than I could ever think of money existing. Like, shut the fuck up. It's cool that you like to eat McDonald's sometimes, maybe, but, like, I think that, like, there is that interesting middle ground that there can be, where, like, there are celebrities that you're kind of like, oh, like, they're kind of a normal person, like, even though they acknowledge they have money, and or, like, they acknowledge their access, their power, etc. And I think that that is the interesting thing about Beyonce, is that Beyonce is so meticulous in how she controls the narrative, so meticulous in how she controls what people know about her and what they see about her and all of that, where it's like, you never can even get the inkling that she could be a real person, other than like, no matter what's going on with her and Jay-Z's relationship, it's like he's hung out with her for a long enough time that, like, she must be down to hang, you know what I mean? Like, to some regard, like, she's got to be chill to some regard, but, like, she never puts down that barrier, even when she is dropping photos or videos or whatever on her, like, website. Like, she's never putting down that barrier. You never see Beyonce with, like, tousled hair. You never see her without the fully manicured idea. And I feel like that is the only thing that's really missing.
Yeah,
it's like she's like trying to give the access, but, like, the access feels manufactured.
Yes, now I'm in a curation role for my full-time job. So I'm, like, very, very good now at identifying what is curated everything's content, really. But it's like, it's very clear that working in this role and seeing, like, people really do want to see authenticity. So it's kind of hard to curate things that do not feel real because people are not going to click on it. But if you have people who, like me, who have been fans of Beyonce since they were 7 years old, they grew up listening to her, they're growing with her, they're going to be hangers on regardless. But someone who's probably, like, a Gen Zer who can spot out inauthenticity from the jump, they're gonna just be like, oh yeah, she looks great. But they know it's like, this is posed. This is forced. This is not authentic.
Do you think that, like, in what she's doing, like, she's going to be able to keep this up and, like, continue to be Beyonce until she's older than most people who've been able to, like, have success as a musician?
Oof. I think so, because it's not coming off as cheesy, at least. Like, it's forced for sure. And of course, like, there's even aspects of the Renaissance album that people have been like, this is an old person. Like, this is mom trying to be cool.
I heard on that podcast that I was listening to, they were talking about, like, there was a few, like, Gen Z lines that slipped in there, and they were like, Beyonce's not saying this. Like,
dead ass. I'm like, Jay-Z wrote that, and you could tell. Even people who are, like, native New Yorkers don't say dead ass. So it's like, that's not right. Take old biddies, like, come on now. Like, Beyonce, you're cool. The slang is very cringe to me. But I think she's going to be okay for a long time to come, because not only is it not cheesy, she is also, like, bringing up the best of the past and the present. Yeah. She's not trying to keep up with the looks and the fashion. She's looking back on eras and genres with reverence to make sure that she's, like, curating something that is digestible to people, regardless of who they are.
This album was very much a curation album. Like, the amount of sampling and interpolating she did was paying homage to all the Black artists before her. And I think that's the purpose of this album. And that's totally fine. Like, she doesn't... I think at this point in her career, it's almost like she's picking and choosing what she kind of wants to center on and focus on. And she realizes maybe it doesn't always need to be herself. And she was like, I want to make a really great album that pulls from Black music and like celebrate that. And I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I think if she continues to center the hallmarks of what really made her a star, made her Beyonce, like focusing on the aesthetics, focusing on the dance, focusing on the feminism, focusing on the Blackness, focusing on all of the things that make her her, like doing something for her gay fans.
Yeah, I mean, I think also just in the thought of like going forward and aging and like all that sort of stuff of like what women are historically not allowed to do and everything. I think also just like of Cher and like her longevity and like ability to withstand all. I kind of am like looking forward to the potential. I want Beyonce to be like 65 and unhinged on Twitter like Cher is.
I kind of hope so too,
like, I feel like at some point like it would be such a gift for herself and for her fans if she's just like, I'm famous enough, I can just like let go and like yell about nonsense on Twitter.
Just let go.
Like my contemporaries did before me. Like she's so iconic, and I feel like has the potential and like is proving that she has like the longevity to like continue like as she grows older, and like nobody really gets sick of it. But it's like there has to be that acknowledgement of age in like that sort of way where I feel like Cher's unhinged tweets are like her way of acknowledging like I'm an old person, but like it's fine.
I know, but
I'm just curious if like Beyonce will like let herself do that.
I think a lot of that does, like, it's crazy because like Cher is unhinged on Twitter, but if you look at old interviews, Cher has always been like this. So it's like, I think Beyonce would have to let us in a little bit more on that personality for us to even be like, oh yeah, like she's in a Mamma Mia and she's doing this, and she's like, we're not seeing enough about her as a human that would allow us to even figure out where she would go next.
I also just wonder if she's been so guarded for so long that I don't know if she ever will do that, because I'm sure it's very hard for her. Like, imagine after all this time she comes out to show her personality. Imagine how anxious she must be that people are not actually going to like her.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think that's, once again, going right back to that perfectionist complex. It's just like, we've seen how goofy she can be. She's fun, but it's just like, are you still like that? Like, I don't know. I feel like you've put up such a wall that it's just like, we're not even sure if we're going to get that fully.
I just imagine, I mean, as somebody who's just a citizen of planet Earth and not Beyonce, the amount of anxiety I have posting anything about TikTok and getting criticism, like, I cannot imagine somebody who's this guarded and this famous. And I don't even think that people would dislike her personality. It's just that, like you said, it's a perfectionism to such a degree that it's like, I don't know if she wants to even deal with what a response would look like if she tweeted something. It's
going to break her down. Like, she doesn't tweet unless it's something that relates to her music. Her first TikTok was just videos of other people dancing to Break My Soul. Like, it's always gonna be curated. And like, granted, like I said, I'm coming also from experiencing very similar feelings about perfection.
Yeah. And so just a wrap up thought of what Beyonce's been able to do and like what she's kind of literally just like paved the road for people after her to be able to follow in. Do you feel like she's set a precedent for longevity as a pop star and like has really made it clear, like, okay, like if you follow these kind of steps, like this is how you could be successful without facing the trials and tribulations that like Britney had to go through or whomever like had to deal with because she wasn't managed by a father who like actually cared or knew how the industry worked or whatever the case is. Do you feel like this is something that's plausible to follow in the footsteps of, or do you think that like it would be ridiculous for people to be like, I need to be like Beyonce, that's how to be successful?
I think in terms of this social media era, she has been able to prolong her popularity and her notoriety by keeping a low profile. But in turn, she's diminished a lot of the things that we originally liked and wanted to see. I think, honestly, like, it works for her. It's worked for her. Obviously, no plan is foolproof, but I think in doing what she's doing, it also has opened up conversations about like what we actually want to see in our pop stars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what we want to see is not only talent, because we don't want like just the personal life to overshadow the gifts.
Yeah.
We kind of want to see the realness of being a human in addition to the talent that you have to offer. Like, I don't want to see you in TMZ and on the Shade Room like every day. It's annoying and really not becoming and does overshadow the work. But it's also like, I do want to see you having a little bit more fun. Like, slouch your shoulders.
Yeah.
Stuff that pizza in your mouth. You can be poised, but you can also be okay with being like a little left of center. It's okay to be so. We've all seen that.
I think my final thought on the matter is that it's very clear through this conversation that there were so many things along the way in her career that aligned for her to end up doing what she's currently doing, that and also in Taylor Swift's attempt to do something similar, that it would just never be done the same way by others.
Never.
So I think that's very interesting. Like, this is not to be like everyone is so unique and different because obviously, but like this is truly like everything in her life like set her up to get to where she is now.
Yeah.
So it's just very interesting that it's like my assumption pre-conversation was that like, oh yeah, this is a pattern like other people can follow, and now I'm very much like, I don't think anyone can follow this. Like, this is Beyonce.
Yeah. Well, I think also like in a way, like J'na was saying, you can pick out the certain aspects of like what Beyonce has done and then also take like what people's criticism has been and kind of combine them, and then maybe through that have like a really successful career. But also you have to be able to have the drive and the organization and all the stuff that Beyonce has in order to even like do similarly to how she's done anything. So that's also just like hard on top of that, where you can be like, okay, like if I mix this and this and this, I'll be just as famous as Beyonce for just as long. As like, okay, but you have to be like as disciplined as Beyonce in that,
and
like,
as talented and as like have a great team behind it and have the intention. A lot of artists are like, oh yeah, they've been famous forever, but it's like the level of intention that Beyonce puts forth into her art and obviously into her presentation as a human it's all calculated. It's all control, but it's also like she was built to do what she's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the 10,000 hours and anyone becomes really great. She's been doing this her whole life.
Yep.
Truly insane. When you think about it in that perspective of like, how do you want to spend your time with your 9-to-5 job? I was thinking about this the other day, and it's like, yeah, you could go work like a corporate job, or you could put as much time and effort and concentration and like vision into what Beyonce has done, and like imagine what your life would be if you truly focused on something that you loved and wanted to do.
We all have the same amount of hours in the day as Beyonce.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, J'na, I just want to give you a huge, huge, huge thank you for coming to do this episode with us. It's been so helpful, so insightful, so inspiring even. I don't know. It's just been a lovely conversation, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Any chance to talk about Beyonce is a day well spent, so.
Incredible. So for you listeners, if you want to find out more about J'na, follow along, read her lovely work. We're going to have all the links in the description below. So yes, once again, thank you, J'na.
Thank you.
I can't believe we finally got to talk about Beyonce.
I think it was a very good, a very appropriate foray into the world of Beyonce.
I feel like this was such a good conversation because I think that also like we were so anxious about doing an episode because we were like, doing a history on Beyonce feels silly, but like how else do we talk about her, because we don't like know that much about her, so we feel like we need to learn everything from point A to point Z. And instead we just got to talk about the thing that most people I think are interested in about Beyonce is like the how she does it.
Yeah. How she does it all, baby. And that's on growth of our podcast, because instead of doing artist histories, we now get to talk about really cool, culturally relevant, recent conversations.
Yeah, and like really get into like the nitty-gritty of an artist and their persona and all of that fun stuff.
And also have lovely, lovely, lovely guests on with us to guide us through it all.
Yeah, it's so exciting. It's so cool. Just the caliber of guests we've gotten to have on this podcast and what people are willing to share with us and let us talk about as just like two confused white girls. Like, it's a gift. It truly is. Yeah, because it's like, I don't know. Having these conversations is hard for anybody, But it's just like especially hard, I think, like I said, for like two white girls to be like, white feminism is stupid, because we all fall into like the trap of accidentally not intersectionalizing our feminism every once in a while. But I think it's important to like acknowledge that like we know that there's a difference and all that sort of stuff, and like that what Beyonce's doing is really special and important, even if she is very quiet in the way she does it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, very eye-opening episode for sure. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed this foray into Beyonce.
Yeah, we hope you guys learned something. We hope you gained something from this convo. And if you want to continue it, we are always willing for a chat, so you can come over to our socials and continue this conversation. We are at Name 3 Songs on all platforms. If you have any personal grievances, beef, or admiration to give us, I am at Sarah_Fagan, and Jenna is at Jenna_Million. So thanks for joining us this week on Name 3 Songs, and until next time, never let anyone make you feel bad about your favorite band.
And remember, you're never too cool to listen to Beyonce.
Don't forget to subscribe to be notified when each episode comes out, and leave us a 5-star review. They really help.
If you want to find out more about any of the sources we referenced in this episode, you can visit name3songs.com.